I do my version of how I ran Ravenloft in just one night today on Daddy Rolled a One. Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Martin, and this is another video in my series of DM advice. I'm going to be talking a little bit about a classic module, though, so it also kind of, I guess, would fit into my D&D history videos. But what I'm going to be talking about today is a recent one-shot that I ran. It was just a couple days ago over this past weekend. Today is Monday, April 1st, and I ran this on Saturday, March 30th, for a friend who had a 50th birthday coming up. And so he asked as my gift to him, if I hadn't bought him a gift already, which I hadn't, he asked if I would run a one-shot D&D session. And that was basically the parameters that he gave. And so I'm going to talk about how I approached it. He only gave me about 2 weeks to get ready. And so I'm going to go through my steps, the players that we had a little bit, how we picked them, and the types of characters that we used. And then I'll walk through my version of how I ran this in one night. And I will tell you up front that a lot of the inspiration for how I ran this in one night came from the Professional Dungeon Master's DUNGEONCRAFT channel. He has a video on how he did it in one night. And so that was my sort of start of my inspiration. But I'm going to dig a little bit more into kind of just how I handled it. Really quickly, before I get started, I want to let you know two things. First off, as I mentioned before, my friend Wes Allen from the Excellent DM Tales YouTube channel is hosting a convention called ECCLESICON coming up on the weekend of, I want to say, April 13th and 14th. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to put it in the show notes below, and I'll put up a screen grab here of the convention details. But it's in New Jersey, and my understanding is, I'm not familiar with that part of the world too much, but I think it's kind of close to Philadelphia. Maybe it's like South New Jersey or something like that. But in any event, he's a great guy. There's going to be a lot of different types of games going on, including 5e, but also I believe like first and second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, either one or the other, and it might be both. And the cool thing about it is that all the proceeds that they make, it's a fundraiser that's going to a local food bank and also to help repair the roof of the church that he belongs to. So if you're around and want a game in that part of the world, definitely check that out. Again, there's going to be a link in the show notes. And then the second thing is I wanted to let the rest of you know that I am actually going to be going to DaveCon. That's in honor of Dave Arneson. And that's coming up the last weekend of April 2024. So I'm going to be there that weekend, Friday, Saturday, and part of Sunday. So if you're going to DaveCon in Minneapolis, definitely look for me. I'm going to try to wear items from my shop, so you'll be able to pick me out pretty easily by my logoed stuff that I'm wearing. And, come say hi. I'd love to chat and catch up with fans of the channel. Okay, so with that out of the way, so what happened was my friend, again, it was his 50th birthday. A couple weeks ago, and he asked if I could run this one shot for him. And I was very, very excited because we've been trying to get a game going with this group of people. There are going to be a total of 5 of us, including me. One of the players, she had to drop out at the last minute because she had to cover someone's shift at work. But hopefully she'll be able to game with us in the future. And I've been wanting to run a campaign for them. She was actually the one that brought it up and asked if I would do this. And we kind of got a group together. And I just never got around to doing it. Partly it's because I'm already gaming in a roughly once a month Savage Worlds game that kind of goes in between either Deadlands or some kind of Cthulhu Delta Green kind of thing. And then I'm running the game for my 14-year-old daughter and her friends, as you know. And it was actually the dad player from that group. If you watch those videos, he was the one that was having the birthday that asked if I would run this. So trying to have consistency with 3 groups a month of different groups of people would be eating up a lot of my weekends. It'd be using up a lot of my free time to prep for the games. And also it's like cutting into time that I would be spending with my wife and daughter doing other things. My wife doesn't play in any of these games. So she's cool with D&D. She has played in games before and was in a long running campaign that I ran. I've just it's on hiatus right now. But So, I've kind of been thinking like at a certain point I don't want this to happen, but I know it's going to happen sooner or later. My daughter and her friends are going to get to the age, she's, 14 now, coming on 15. They're going to get to the age where they might not want to play D&D with us anymore. And again, I hate to even think about that, but I'm also a realist, and I know that there's going to be different things going on with, more school events and activities and different friend groups and things like that. So my thinking was kind of like, I want to ride that out as long as I can. And then if that gets to the point where it shuts down, then I would be able to start another game. And so the players of this are kind of aware of that, but I was fine to do a one shot. Okay. So I had a lot of prep in 2 weeks. And so what I decided to do was sort of design my own system of game. And it was basically based on this BX Dungeons and Dragons. Now, this is the version of the game that I'm running for my daughter and her friends, including the stats. So it would have been easier to just use this rule system. But I've been playing around with wanting to do some different ideas in the game system, because I just want to see how it would work differently. And maybe over time, I might start incorporating some of those ideas into the game for my daughter. So I took this as my start, but I did incorporate some stuff from 5e and some stuff from Index Card RPG, and then from my understanding is pronounced Mirkbori, and also, and I didn't grab my book, but from the original version. Well, I think it was the second edition. Actually, I'll put a screen grab up here of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So now a lot of those were influences that were part of the Deathbringer system that Professor Dungeon Master made on DUNGEONCRAFT. And he has a new version now. He's working on, I think it's like a bigger one that's going to be, maybe he's going to kickstart it or something like that. But there is a sort of trifold version right now that you can get that has some really cool layout. And the idea is it's one piece of paper and you can fold it in thirds. And that's everything that you need to play. I was actually inspired by a very much earlier version of his Deathbringer game where it was multiple pages. Still very rules light, but that was kind of roughly the system that I wanted to run. But I needed to tighten it up and work on it to just fit my aesthetics and sensibilities. And so I worked on those rules, and then I talked to the player. And so the first thing I did really was ask the player, okay, what style of game do you want to play? He plays in the game with my daughter, so I wanted to make sure that he maybe was going to do things that he doesn't get to do as often in that game, because as the dad player, he does try to kind of let the girls take the lead, and he really only steps in if they seem lost or confused or distracted or something like that, and then he'll jump in with ideas. But for the most part, he's even playing a character in that game that his daughter suggested that he play. It was that he's playing the cleric in that game. And so I said, hey, so what do you want to focus on? He said, my priority is combat and puzzle solving. And he said he wasn't really interested in NPC interactions. So that helped me out a lot to kind of understand what he was looking for. And then I asked him who he wanted to play, and he picked this group. And again, the one woman couldn't play, but two of my other friends, Jeff and Bill, were playing. So Jeff is my best friend going back to I was 18 and I'm now 53. So you can kind of get a sense of how long I've been friends with this guy. And my friend Bill is a newer friend that I met, but I've already known him for probably 6 or 7 years. And he is the graphic designer that I work with. So at my shop, he's the one that designed the Dice and Dragons design. He's also the one that helped make high-res versions of all those dice patents. And he does a lot of different fun designs. That's just his job. His day job is graphic design. So, but he used to play D&D back in the day when he was a kid. And so those were going to be the players, those three guys, and then me. And so I said, okay. And I had wanted to run Ravenloft as a one shot since I saw Professor Dungeon Master do it on his channel. And I thought this will be a great idea because we can have higher level characters. That was the other thing this dad player, his name's John, what he wanted was to have higher level characters that could do more things, because in the game that he is in with my daughter, it's been coming up on 3.5 years and he's only 3rd level. And some of the players are actually only a 2nd level. So he kind of wanted to start a little bit higher. So I said, okay. And so then what I did was I sent an email to the prospective players and said, hey, this is the day that he's picked. If you can be available on this day, we're going to play this game. Let me know if you want to play. And when they all wrote back in agreement and got were able to coordinate their schedules, I sent a list of the classes that I was making for this. And again, these were inspired by the list from Professor Dungeon Master's game. And so the classes were Bounty Hunter, Cleric, Duelist, Fighter, Plague Doctor, and Rogue. And there's two different kinds of rogues, Thief and Scoundrel, and then Wizard. So those were the classes. And then I said, write back and tell me which two that you want to be, because I knew I was going to need more than 3 characters in this. So I said, every player is going to play 2 characters, and then you're going to have hirelings. And I'll figure out how many hirelings you have. And what I did was I rolled a D4. I came up with 3, and they had 3 hirelings. So, and I kind of said, whoever writes back first is going to be, get their first choice. Now, what I did do was make sure I alerted the 50-year-old player, the guy whose birthday it was, hey, make sure you check this email, write back and pick what you want. So he picked to play a Bounty Hunter and a Wizard. And then another player picked to play a Plague Doctor and a Cleric. And then the last player picked the Fighter and a Thief. And so those were their characters. And then I made the hirelings. Basically, I filled in the gaps. So I had like a Duelist and a couple more Fighters. I felt like they needed a little more oomph in the fighting department. And so then what I did, and this is going to tie in very closely to another video. Again, I know I keep mentioning the DungeonCraft channel. That was the channel that inspired me to start running the game for my daughter, and was one of the main inspirations for me making my own YouTube channel. That and Questing Beasts were kind of like the two, and then others came along the way, like DM Tales and other ones like that. But those were kind of like the first ones. So what I did was start working on these rules, like I mentioned. And so I just pasted them inside my book. So this is kind of how I put my stuff together. You guys have seen this before, but I got a brand new notebook for this particular game and figured out how I was going to run the game, basically. So I don't, you can get most of these rules. Mine are different, but as a starting point, if you want to get these rules, you can join the DungeonCraft Patreon. It's like $2 and you can download everything that he's written and sent out to his patrons. But I knew I wanted the game to start in the middle of the action, because this player wanted combat, and I wanted to grab these guys' attention really close. And so I told them that they're going to be going through an old school original D&D adventure. Now, I knew I was going to run this, but I didn't want them to know that. So I never told them what we were going to be going through. And so what I did was I brought these 2 modules with me, and I put them so they couldn't see. And I kind of eschewed them like this and accidentally left them out on top of my pile of notes and stuff while we were getting ready, getting our snacks and stuff like that. And so when we started, I basically did a scene where, again, they started, I think it's called en medias res, or, for Latin is like in the middle of the action. And that's how we started. And so I wrote this out. Now, this is way more text than I would normally write in the game that I run for my daughter. And this, normally I would just do bullet points, really quick, so I can refer to it really quickly. But I do that normally because I practice what I'm going to be saying during my morning walks, especially when it's kind of setting the mood. Any kind of exposition or mood, scenes or environment, that kind of stuff. I practice it, and I practice NPC dialogue. When I can kind of anticipate who they're going to be talking to, I can kind of practice a voice or just mannerisms or just, just specific words of what they're going to say. In this case, because I only had about 2 weeks to put the entire thing together, I ended up writing it out more as a narrative. And I actually kind of read this. Now, I looked up from time to time. I practiced reading it multiple times, so it wasn't boring. I had my timing down and everything like that. But this, again, is a little bit more wordy than I would normally do for a game. But as you see, they started out, and I entitled The Frost Giant Attack. So what I told them was they'd made quick work of the steading of the Hill Giant Chiefs, of the Hill Giant Chief. And so they were giants. Yeah, I get it. And then I was but you didn't do so well against the frost giants and you were totally outmatched. And so you're now running, you're fleeing through this forest and like the icy cold snow-capped mountains, and you're heading south and you're trying to get away. And they were completely caught off guard. They're like, what? They thought that they were going to be going through the frost giant module because I'd left it out. I had no intention of doing anything with these modules other than using them as kind of like a smoke screen to throw them off the scent. Also, again, I did want to start in the middle of the action, and this module doesn't do well. Ravenloft doesn't do well if you try to start in the middle of the action. It needs a little bit of like atmospheric setup, to be honest. At least that's how I feel about it. So I wanted them to have this quick combat. I also wanted to test out the combat mechanics because, you know, one of them doesn't play that often. My best friend, Jeff, he plays a little bit of Savage Worlds, but he's not really good at mechanics and remembering things like that. So I wanted to get them involved really quickly so that they could like zip through some stuff and kind of like get used to what we were doing here. And so, and I had these like really cool descriptions about the forest that they were in and how cold it was, things like this. And I wanted to make it like more of give it like that Slavic folklore, environment, like aesthetic, like themes. Okay. So I changed the frost giants. They were still frost giants, like mechanically, but I kind of made them into, I believe they're called Leshy, but it's sort of like Slavic forest spirits, but like gigantic. And so I said and these are just pictures I found on like Pinterest and stuff, and I just printed them out. And so rather than try to describe this, I described it a little bit, but I just said it kind of looks like this, except they had pale blue skin and their armor was made of bones, but they had like these, you know, big tree trunks that they were using as clubs. And there was just two of them. And I mentioned how they're like, you know, chasing them through the forest. And so we did some chase mechanics, and then they got into the combat. And so I was like, do you want to fight or do you want to keep running? Like, they've caught up to you. And one of the things I did was say, like, because these are sort of like forest spirits, even though they're gigantic, they were completely silent moving through the forest. So while these guys are running, and I talk about like the leaves, you know, dampening their sounds, but like they can hear twigs and stuff snapping on the forest floor as they're moving through. These giants made absolutely no sound. And so they got a surprise round. They came out of nowhere. And I said, okay, do you guys want to try to stop and fight, or do you want to keep running? And they're like, well, there's 9 of us, including their hirelings. And they're like, we're going to stay and fight. And it was really bad. After 2 rounds, they were in really bad shape. And they're like, we need to run. And what I had done was on the second round, these guys, instead of throwing boulders, I had them throw tree trunks. So they had ripped some tree trunks out of the ground. And I talked about, like, they heard the sound. They heard the crunching noise of these trees coming out of the ground. And then they whipped the trees at them and threw them. And and then I said, because they did that, they're now disarmed. And so if they take a second, you know, you can run if you choose to run, and then and get a little bit ways, and then they can then throw tree trunks on the next round unless they chase you. And so, well, what happened was I'd known that there was going to be this frozen lake here, so I had this complication. And so they were running, and they ended up on this lake that was frozen, and the ice starts kind of like spider webbing and cracking, and they were like, uh-oh. And that's why the giants stopped chasing them, actually, because the giants knew that was there. So I had all that kind of planned ahead, as like the lake was going to be there. I didn't know if they would stay and fight. I didn't know how well they would do if they stayed and fight. As it turned out, they were rolling really poorly on their damage dice. They were rolling okay to hit, but then they'd roll damage and they'd get like 1s and 2s. So what I did was, when they got onto the ice, I rolled a d4 plus 2 to see what was going to happen, when the ice was going to like break through. Okay. And so, and it turns out I rolled a 4. And so based on, like that, and also this was really mostly just intended to be a quick intro. I knew it was going to be a one shot. They're not using these characters again. So I kind of just moved it along, and I said, okay, yeah. So they had 6 rounds, which to me meant like that was going to be enough time for them to get safely across and get away from these frost giants, whatever you want to call them, that had stopped chasing, because they knew they were too heavy to move onto the ice. And they were actually hoping that the characters were going to fall through the ice. And they just wanted to kind of watch them die, but that didn't happen. So that was kind of it. Now, you'll see I had some notes here just in case, because again, the main player, the dad player, wanted to make sure that he got in a lot of combat. And so that's part of the reasons why I started with a combat. I put some different environmental things in here, like, the frozen lake. I used like the giants throwing tree trunks at them, because I thought like that was kind of a cool a cool visual to have during the game. And but I had made a note here. It's like, look, if the fight's going way too easy, and because I wanted this guy to make sure that he got the player to make sure that he got his combat in. So I had notes of like how I could add to it. So I was going to have the forest actually attack them, like with the branches whipping out and things like this, trying to trip them. And then have some polar bears, because that just, it fit aesthetically with like these kind of like the snowy area that they're in. As it turns out, they were so hurt. I mean, like 2/3 of them. So out of the 9 characters, including the hirelings, like probably about 6 of them had been knocked worse than like less than half hit points after just 2 rounds of combat. So maybe 2 or 3. Like the giants were just doing really, really well. And they were getting multiple attacks and things. So anyway, that was kind of how we got through that. And so then after we did that, I kind of stopped and I said, okay, hey, welcome, so I didn't really like start an intro until we did this. So I mean, I had kind of said like, okay, we're going to start now and this is what happens, and then I just jumped right into like this explanation here of what was happening, and they were sort of like, what's happening? And so it like really kind of hooked them. And then I said, hey, welcome to the game. I'm testing out this new system. You guys saw the rules, so keep me on my toes, and like also make notes. Let me know what you think about it so I can make change in the future, whatever. And then I had them introduce their characters. And that's one of the things that they had asked when we started. One of them said, should we tell each other who we are? And I was like, there's no time. You're doing this. Just, each other. And so then I said, why don't you introduce your characters to each other? It's like, take a breather after this, because this was pretty intense. And it actually took even a little longer than I was anticipating. And so, they introduced their characters to each other. And now one of the guys had me make his characters for him. That's my friend Jeff. And he said, hey, can you just do it for me? And I said, sure. The other 2 players, Bill and John, they made their characters themselves, and I walked them through how to advance their characters. But I did some kind of fun stuff. So like one of the things that I had done with the cleric character was I had them use these weird traits, and that was this is from my blog. So I wrote this whole blog post, and there's actually 20 of these in order to fit it on the page here. I just narrowed it to like 6. And so now this was supposed to be for the player. But he had me design his character. So I made the die roll, and he ended up where his weird trait was that he carried around the severed head of like the previous leader of his religious sect that he was in, his religious order, and that the head speaks to him and gives him advice, but others can't see that, or they can see the head. They can't hear it. They can see it if he chooses to show it to them, but they can't hear it. And then, and I said, one day a disciple of yours will carry your head in the same manner. And so the player, and I thought that was fun. And this is actually what I did roll, but I was really glad that I rolled that, because I knew this player was going to hand that up. He loves stuff like that. And so if you saw my video where I talked about, I was running Lost Caverns of Sojkanth, and I talked about there was a player that was a paladin, but I told him that like he had this like outrageous Scottish accent, and because the player is of Scottish heritage, and I gave him like some cool little role playing thing. That's the same player, right? So he did this where he kept the head hidden in a bag, and nobody knew that he had it, because they weren't reading the rules on how to create a cleric, because they hadn't picked to play cleric. So he was the only one that read through this, and so he would like be talking, and then he would turn and start talking to something else, like he'd be like, shut up, or like whatever, and the other 2 players was like, what is happening? And then he would go right back to just talking, and then he really played it up. It was really funny. So I put that in there, and again, these are all on my blog. So if you go to my blog and search for the label of like weird fantasy, you'll see I did these for all of the 7 classic classes from 1981 BX D&D. So I did cleric, dwarf, elf, fighter, halfling, magic user, and thief, and I did like D20 weird traits for each of them. So then the other thing that I did for the cleric was, and this is also on my blog, I did a faith design table. So I said he's part of what I called the Great Church. It's just, it's just easier, right? Because I'm kind of going for this kind of like late medieval, early Renaissance sort of technology era, and I wanted like sort of this like nation spanning church that I called the Great Church. But I created these like this faith design table where you roll a D20 3 times So the first one is for the adjective, the second one's for the priesthood name, and then the third one is for the faith or the sect name. So that you can create like just a huge number of different faith, and these could all be part of the same great church, just like a specific order, just like different like the Catholic Church today has different orders of within the church. So that's kind of what I did. So I had him use this. And then I also had this, and these are all coming from my blog as well. These are superstitions. So I had him roll a superstition, and I had him roll some omens, right? So that was that. And then like the wizard was kind of similar. So different player, but I had the wizard had weird traits. And again, there's 20 of these on my blog, but I just condensed it to 6 to fit on this page here. And in this particular case, this wizard, his weird trait, or her weird trait, was he played a girl wizard, was animal components. Where the material components of every spell you cast consists of the parts of dead animals, and you've been caught once or twice collecting them. Well, as it turned out, the background that this player rolled also was that the character, he called her Brit the Unburnt. She had been they tried to burn her at the stake, and she had escaped at the last minute, and so she was on the run. And so he decided that fit into with the animal components. Like that's why they were burning her, because they caught her like breaking into what he said was like taxidermy shops and taking pieces of animals. So fun little things that I added to the game that like kind of, and building off stuff again that I've done on my blog, which the players, they really enjoyed, because they actually, none of these guys read my blog. So it was all new to them, and they thought like that was really fun. So they introduced their characters. And then the other thing that I forgot to mention when I was talking about my friend Bill, so I mentioned he was a graphic designer. So when I talked to him about playing in the game, I said, what would be really fun is we should do some kind of t-shirt for my friend's birthday. And for and Bill knows John, like we're all friends, and so we should do something for John's birthday, like t-shirt, and we all just show up wearing it, and then we have one for him, and he puts on. And Bill sells t-shirts on his own shop for his own designs and stuff that he does. And he's in past life, he was like the official graphic artist of the Lebowski Fest. He's a big fan of the movie The Big Lebowski, and so tons of designs on his shop are like Big Lebowski related. And so I was like, can you come up with a design? He's like, yeah, what do you want? And, it's like, good for him for asking. I'm a bad, person to give advice like this. I didn't know. I just know I wanted something. And I was like, I don't know. What if it's just like percentile dice rolling 50, and it's like, happy 50th birthday, John. Like, I was super boring with it. And Bill's like, no, I don't want to do that, because I'd rather get a shirt that like we can keep wearing once it's past his birthday, and like we can keep wearing it. And I was like, okay, that's cool, but like I have no idea. And so I spitballed some ideas with him, and then eventually I kind of was like, what if we made it look like a module cover like this? But I didn't show Bill this because I didn't want him to know that we were running this one. So I actually showed him I-5 instead, which is part of the Desert of Desolation series. And I said, like, this is the trade dress of the era of the module that I'm going to be running. If you can do something like that. But I was like, I don't anticipate you're going to do like the full picture and stuff, because you don't have time. Also, like, we need to get these things printed so that we have them on time. And so he came up with a design, and I'm just going to show it here. So I do think he used a couple of like quick online tools to put this together, but this wasn't for the intent of him to sell it and make money. It was just for our group. And I thought it was hilarious. My wife cracked up. I do wish I had caught when he showed me the proof that he'd spelled roll with 2 L's instead of L-E. But that's just a small nitpick. And I thought it was hilarious. So anyway, Jeff, Bill, and I coordinated to get there at the same time, but we were playing at John's house, and the three of us all had our shirts on, but we kind of like kept our backs to the door where we were getting our stuff out of the car. And then we all turned around and walked up to the front door, and John just started cracking up. And then his wife thought it was hilarious. My wife was dying when she saw the design. She just couldn't stop laughing. So anyway, that was part of the fun of our game. I also brought some, just while we're talking about like the kind of the stuff that I did, I brought some fun thematically named beers for us to drink during the game. So I had this like Arctic pale ale to match the Arctic setting of the first part of the session. And then I had like a zombie something, I forget the name of it, but I'll put the picture here. It was like a zombie related IPA because we're going to get into some zombies that we get into Ravenloft. And then there was like a dragon's milk stout. And again, just for the dragon aspects of it. So again, it was just all kind of stuff that John really appreciated the attention to detail once he saw what we were doing. So I had music. I had a playlist of music. that I built on Spotify, and I had a portable speaker, a Move speaker, and I just played it through my phone, and I built it out so that I could just turn it on and let it go, and I didn't have to like fiddle around with fast forwarding songs and stuff. Each they would just kind of like led into the other. So I started out with kind of like frozen tundra, Arctic kind of sounds, and I kept that going. And I did actually end up pausing that because that part of the music ended while we were kind of talking and introducing the characters. And then I started it back up with like spooky sounds, and then it went all the way through the rest of the Ravenloft session. So anyway, this is kind of how I designed my thing. Now, what I did was for the actual module, I did the exact same thing that Professor Dungeon Master did. I didn't use the maps in here. The maps in here are gorgeous. I love them. The ones by, I think they're by Dave C. Sutherland, if I can remember correctly. I always get confused whether it's him or Diesel, and I should know this by now. Let's see. There's the illustrator. Where is the map design? Well, sorry guys, I don't want to belabor this. I'll put a screen grab up here, or a note to say who did the maps, because I know I'm going to get it wrong if I say that who it was. But in any event, these maps, as you see, the maps are great, but I didn't want to use the maps. We weren't playing with minis, so I decided to do the zone thing that Professor Dungeon Master does. So I divided it into the 5 zones. So I kind of had like the entrance, the ground floor. I had the upper levels, the roof, the dungeon, and then the crypts. So those were sort of the 5 areas. So I put in, again, I did my spreads here. So I had like what was happening at the gate when they got there, what he was going to say to the cleric, a character, I called him presbyter, and that he might want to visit the church. And, it's a little bit leading. I also did tell the players that, like, look, we're doing this in one night. So I'm going to be doing things where, like, I'm going to move you from scene to scene. And it's going to be sort of like artistic license. And I'm going to kind of say, like, okay, you guys end up here. You did this, or you went here, whatever it was. And now now here's the scene that's set, and now you can react to that, but you're going to skip past some things. So like the travel from getting from the forest, from where they started with the frost giants, to getting to the arrival at the gates was kind of the gates of Barovia. That was, I didn't roll for encounters. We didn't like go through the actual like day by day of how long they were on the road. I just said, like, it's been a little over a week. You're hungry. You're running low on supplies, and here's the gates, and this town shouldn't be here, kind of thing. And so they entered the town, and they were fine with that. They understood why I was doing that. And that was part of how you run this in one night, is that things like that, where normally in my daughter's game, like, there would be road encounters, because they love that. The players love rolling on my random table. I make them roll, and then I narrate the result, and we figure out what happens. And a lot of times things come up that, like, I hadn't anticipated, and that's part of the fun for me. In this particular case, because I'm running into one night, I couldn't run it that way. There was no time allotment set aside for things that were unexpected to happen, unfortunately. But what it did mean was that, I moved them along, and then they could get through the entire module in one night, which is what we did. So I have my descriptions. Again, this is much more wordy than I would normally write it out. Normally I would have more bullet points, and then I would just practice it a lot more, so it's a little bit more natural. But in this case, I wanted to make sure I didn't forget anything, hit some key points. So I kind of wrote it out a little bit more narratively. But, I talked about this before, but I always do like my sight, smells, sounds. I try to get like all the senses involved, so that it's not just you see this. So I also do things, and I talked about this a second ago, but like, I'd like to show pictures. So because we're not playing online, I can't put it up online, but I just print them out. So this was the guard at the gate. And then I showed them, like, the town kind of looks like this. And I just said, imagine these aren't crosses, but they're like the great tree of the great church, the tree with the golden fruits on it. And they know what that is. So I talked about that a little bit. And so the town kind of looked like this. And like, here's a typical street scene. And so again, these are all things that I found online. And they weren't exactly perfect, but they were close enough. And that's just what I needed to, like, evoke a mood. And they appreciated that. So I had pictures like when they got to the tavern, the Blood on the Vine tavern. I had pictures of, like, what I thought the innkeeper and his wife and daughter would look like. And so they were like, okay, that's cool. The cleric player ended up going to the church. And so I said, well, the priest kind of looks like this and the temple kind of looks like this, but again, it would have the tree on the top. So it helped them kind of get into the mood of understanding. But so I had this listed out as like this is the first, like when they get to the gate, and it was like the gate, the tavern, and the church. That was like this spread. And then this spread here was in case they wanted to go to any other areas in town. I had made like a quick note of like what might be there and what their names might be, or names of the NPCs might be. And then I had like what's going to happen at nighttime when the bell rings. If you've played this module before, you know what that means. So, and then I had nighttime encounters. Now, I hadn't intended to do nighttime encounters, but I realized by this point, we were getting a lot more into the role-playing aspect because they were doing a lot of interacting with these NPCs. And I knew that the main player, that was not really his priority. And so I made a decision on the spot. I had notes in case it came up. And I decided, like, yeah, that was probably a good idea. I put this in here because I knew it had kind of been too long since anything had happened. So I had the wargs attack. And in the module, it says on a 1, you roll a d6, and on a 1 or a 2, they break in. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to let the dice decide. So I knew the wargs were there. They could hear them. They'd heard them outside. They heard the howling. They heard him scratching at the door in the inn and things like that. And I rolled the d6, and I rolled it in front of them. All the dice rollings in front of them. So I rolled a d6, and I got a 1. And so I said, okay, you hear them break through. And so there was a combat so that they could do that combat really quick. And the bats showed up to affect the spell casting. So the other thing that happens in this system that I'm running, and again, this is the idea I got from the DungeonCraft channel, is that spellcasters, both clerics and wizards, are rolling to cast. So I'm not using Vancian magic. They can cast any spell that they know as many times as they want during a day, but they have to roll to cast and hit a target number, which is either going to be the AC of the creature that they're fighting at the time, or if it's a non-combat situation, it's a DC of 10. But they roll dice, and if they roll a 1, there is a mishap, and there were tables for the clerics and the wizards to roll on the table to see what happens if they roll a 1. So because the casters are rolling to cast, if the bats were basically going to affect that to where like it was going to increase the DC to cast from a 10 to like a 14 because the bats are going to be flying around. So the other thing that happens is because there's that 5% chance every time that you roll that D20 that you're going to get a 1, it starts the characters to kind of think about like, maybe I don't want to actually cast the spell. And there were times when the wizard player and the cleric player both rolled a 1 on a spell casting check. And in fact, I think the wizard did it more than once. So there was a point in time, one of the combats, and it might have been with the wargs actually, John, the guy whose birthday it was. So he's running 2 characters. And so he was rolling for each one of his characters, and he rolled 1s for both in that specific attack. So the wizard had to roll on the misfire table because she didn't cast her spell. And then the other character, his bounty hunter, rolled a 1. And so then there was a consequence for like he was going to miss his next action because he rolled a 1. And then on the very next round that they got back into the combat. So they each missed a round because of that. And so then the round after that, he rolled again and he got another 1 for his bounty hunter. I swear he was going to throw his die across. So he was so angry. And I've never seen that happen. Three 1s like in that quick of succession by the same player. So and also using different dice. So like when he rolled the first time, he had 2 different D20s and they each got 1s. It was just uncanny good or bad luck for him. But in any event, you're also going to see this note here where it says Cora equals Tatiana. This is my horrible scribbler writing. And then that's actually says Tobias, if you can believe that. Tobias equals Sergei. So another idea that I took from the DungeonCraft version of Ravenloft is instead of Count Strahd, going after Irina, who's a local NPC because she is sort of supposedly the reincarnation of his lost love, Tatiana. Instead of having that the case, it was having one of the players be that incarnation. And so what I had done was I had written out note cards ahead of time, like index cards. And I wrote down and I said, you are the reincarnation of Tatiana. And they'd heard the story. They kind of got the idea of who this was at a certain point, of who these characters were, Tatiana and Sergei and Strahd. And so I said, you're the reincarnation of Tatiana. And like, basically just so the player was aware of that. And then I did that for Sergei. And so what I had was each of the players, I said, okay, roll a d20. They each were playing a male PC and a female PC. And then there was the hirelings, right? And so I said, okay, each roll a d20. And so my friend Bill, he rolled the lowest on the d20. And so his character, Cora, ended up being the reincarnation of Tatiana. Just as a complete coincidence, he named his character Cora, which is the name of my daughter's character in the game that we play. Bill doesn't watch my YouTube channel either. And so he was totally unaware of that. I said, oh, that's funny. That's what my daughter named her character. And he was like, what? He had no idea. And then since he had that, I didn't have him roll for his other PC. And so then I had Jeff and John roll a d20. The lowest was Jeff. And so his cleric Tobias ended up being the reincarnation of Sergei. So, but again, I've got my spread here for when we get to Madame Eva's tent, the Wanderer's tent. And so I just use these cards. Bill gave these to me years ago at holiday time. I think he just had a bunch of cards and thought that we would all like them. And so they have like they just have some cool designs. So this is the Fae deck. So I didn't have any tarot cards. I didn't have the official WotC version of the Toroka deck or whatever it's called. So I just use these cards with the kind of different kind of symbols on them. So I actually, as a way to save time and also just be better prepared, I figured out ahead of time. I drew cards ahead of time to figure out where all these different items were held at the in the castle. And so when the players pulled the cards out, that was really just for show. I know that's cheating. I know it was kind of like I didn't give them the agency to like figure out where the things were. They had no idea that I had already made it up. So it didn't matter what card came up, that it didn't match, the symbol or whatever, because they didn't know what the symbols meant anyway. So it was completely irrelevant to them. And so really the ones that affected them the most were they, out of the 5 cards, they got 5 spades. And so that was bad because it meant when they were in that room, they were going to be -1 to hit and they were going to take a penalty to their AC. And so those ones I did do on the fly, like what the symbols were for that series of the cards. But like this first set of cards, figuring out where each item was, it was just easier for me to know ahead of time where it was going to be so that I could be prepared. And so that was how I handled the card reading. And then the rest of this is stuff that I basically got from the way that Professor DM puts it together. So I'm not going to show that because you can get that on his Patreon. And then I did the brides the exact same way he did. I even used the same names and I wrote like what their personalities were because I kind of liked that idea of like the brides of Dracula and stuff. I had my Tome of Strahd and I printed it out with kind of like this background to make it look kind of parchmenty. So I was printing and writing and doing stuff right up until the last minute. There was a lot because, I went to the store, I got snacks, I got that beer that I showed earlier. I'm chatting with Bill about the shirt designs. So it really kind of came down to the last minute. I put out a ton of those like battery operated tea lights, which I already had a bunch of them at home, but all of them, the batteries had gone dead. So I had to run to the store and find like the little, whatever they're called, disc batteries or button batteries, whatever those things are called. So I had to get a bunch of those. So yeah. And, the next time I think it'll be a little bit easier and I'll be able to kind of like get into it a little bit more as far as like the role playing and being slightly more prepared. But in any event, we were able to get through this all in one night. So I did tell them once they got out of Madame Eva's tent, it was about, what time was it? It was 4:12 p.m. Like real time. So we started playing at 1. So it was 4:12. And I said, okay, it's 4:12. You have until 6:12. You have 2 hours to find all 5 of those items, go through the castle and defeat Strahd. And Madame Eva made it very clear. Once you enter the castle, if you haven't succeeded in your task and before sunrise, your characters will be dead and your souls will now march forever with the ghosts from the cemetery that failed in the task to like defeat Strahd. And so And so I just did, and so they were like setting the alarms on their clocks or on their watches so they knew how much time they had. Well, as it turns out, like my daughter had come over to hang out with John's daughter, and then John's wife took them to the mall, and they went out and they had a little snack and they got their nails done. They did all this kind of stuff. Well, they came back like right in the middle. So it was like 5:30 when they came back. And then we lost a bunch of time, like chatting with them. His wife wanted to know how the game was going. And so, I was keeping an eye on how much time had elapsed. And I had told them like, look, if stuff like that happens, we're going to delay, and I'll add extra time because that's not really fair to you guys or like whatever. And they were okay with that. But then they're like, well, we should stop and order food. And I had wanted to do like a fancy dinner for John's birthday, but we went with the classic and just got pizza. We just got pizza and salad, had some wine, and so all that added to the time. So we ended up not finishing until about 8, even though I'd said, you've got 2 hours. I wanted to be very kind of flexible, and I gave them the choice when, they did go past the 2 hours, even taking out all that other stuff that we did. But I told them like, hey, we can kind of just keep going if you want to finish, if you want to feel like you accomplished something, because I knew we weren't going to play this again. This was like a one and done kind of thing. And I said, or we can say that you failed, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And your characters just all died, and you go into, this endless march of these ghosts and stuff. And so they talked about, and they're like, no, if you're willing to keep going, we'd like to finish. And I said, that's great. I actually want to have you finish too, because I want to see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. And so they decided to finish. Now, when they were going through the adventure, they decided to split up to try to find all the different items. And so they split into 2 groups, one of 5 of one of 4. I was trying to kind of lead them in the direction that they should split into 3 groups of 3 because it could cover more ground. They were very concerned that if they were below, they were already concerned that splitting it all was going to mean that they were going to have a tough time with any fights that they came across. But they decided that they did not want to do groups of 3. And what they did, which was very clever, and it helped a lot as far as keeping people entertained and people not sitting around not doing anything. They divided their characters up so that each of the 3 players played one character in each of the 2 groups that they split up. Because remember, the 9 players or the 9 characters, 3 of them are hirelings that I was kind of running for them. I'd done the stats and stuff, and they were basically just, a combination of torchbearer and cannon fodder. And, because they didn't really, normally they wouldn't treat hirelings that way. But again, these are not characters they're going to use long term. So they didn't need to develop relationships with the hirelings and make sure that everything was fine. So they split into the 2 groups. But again, each one of them was running, one of their 2 characters in each of the groups. And that way, nobody was bored sitting around waiting while I dealt with the other group. So that was cool that happened. It helped a lot. It enabled them to split without being distracted and bored. And so one of the groups went into the dungeon and they fought the zombies that are in here. There's some Strahd zombies, and there's the scene with the guy making like the zombie stew and all that kind of stuff. And that was a tough fight. There were 10 zombies and there were 4 characters. Actually, that group was the one that I think had 5. So of the 2 groups, that one had 5 characters. So one of them died. It was one of the hirelings, but it was one of the fighters, and she died during the zombie fight. And the other characters were down at one point. One of them had 6 hit points left. One of them got all the way down to like 1. And that was the group with the cleric. So the cleric was healing, but in the rules that I wrote, when the cleric heals, he only heals D4. And so there were times where like he would roll his casting, and he would make his casting, but then he would roll the D4 and he'd get like 1 or 2, and they needed more than that. Now he did get a clutch time where I told you about how John rolled 3 1s in a row. The cleric player rolled 2 natural 20s in a row, one round after the other, to heal. And so what I had said was, when you roll max, the effects are doubled, but rather than making a roll, I say it's max die doubled. So in this case, it was, D4 max is 4 times 2 is 8. So there were 2 different times in a row where he healed 8 points of damage. That was huge for this group. So that happened. They found the crypt, and they fought the warg that was guarding Strahd's tomb. And that was a huge fight, but they got out of that. And then the other group upstairs was fighting like the bride vampires. They were all upstairs. And and I had told them, I was like, hey, the vampires were using like their mesmerize trick. But, Ravenloft, like Dracula, Dracula is Professor Dungeoncraft said, it's a very erotic book. And there are overtones in this that were really kind of like whitewashed and cleaned up when this is written to make it more friendly and family friendly for kids. But I added that back in with the brides and stuff from the Coppola movie, which is again an idea I stole from Dungeoncraft. And so there's things where like they can use their charms, but I kind of thought like the charms should really only affect people that are attracted to them. And so I left it up to the players. I said, I had 3 guy players, but each one of them was playing a female PC and a male PC. And so I said, hey, tell me of your PCs, which sex are they attracted to? And so I let them decide. And so one was like like this one's bi, this one's straight, this one's, attracted, like it was this was gay, like whatever it was. Right. And so as it turned out, if they had just said that all the women were attracted to men, and I'm not saying that's what they should have done, but had they done that, it would have helped their numbers, because what happened was the vast majority of their characters that they were running, whether they were male or female, were all attracted to women. And so the mesmerization affected like the vast majority of them, where because they failed their saves, they wouldn't attack. And that was bad. So there was a point where they had the 5 characters, and of the 5, only one of them was able to attack the vampire because she mesmerized the other ones where they couldn't attack her. And that was really, really tough. Until the other one snapped out of it. And then unfortunately the cleric player was downstairs in the crypt, so he was never upstairs to turn the vampires. And I had anticipated that he would be. And again, that goes to show why I shouldn't have anticipated that. And so that was a tough fight, but they made it through. At the end of the day, all 3 of the hirelings were dead. So 2 fighters and a duelist were dead, and the cleric player died. And I was kind of sad that he died, but again, it doesn't really matter because this is a one shot. But one of the things that I loved was after he died, he had told the other characters at a certain point, the other players, he had the character talk about like, I'm carrying this head and it's because this is the former head of my order. And so I talked to it. That's why I keep sounding like I'm crazy. I'm talking to my head, but the character was saying this, not the player. I mean, the player's acting it, but like, and so he said like, one day I'll have the honor of one of the faithful of my faith, like carrying my head around doing the same thing. That's just how our sect works of this faith. And so one of the bounty hunter player, like after Tobias the cleric died, the bounty hunter went and cut his head off to keep it so that he could hand this down to someone in the order so that he could keep talking and give his faithful advice to the next person, which I love that even though this was a one shot, the player had the forethought to do that just to kind of honor what this guy's player was doing. So anyway, that was kind of fun. That was really how we wrapped it up. So it was a little bit of a quick wrap up, but what I tried to do was I started with a combat, we ended with a combat. The last thing that happened was that they were fighting Strahd. They had defeated him in such a way that he was not able to come back, and they knew that. They'd read the Tome of Strahd, so they followed the steps. But I had the combats for John because that's what he wanted, but also he mentioned he wanted the puzzle solving. And so that was like the tarot cards. It was like figuring out this symbol means this thing and it's in this room and trying to figure out like what all that meant and which room to go in and where to look. And so that was the puzzle aspect. And then there was NPC interactions because I know Jeff really likes that, my buddy Jeff. And even though it's not his birthday, he was one of the players investing his time. So I wanted to make sure he got to shine because he doesn't really like the mechanics. He's not into that. He's into the role play parts. So, but I bookended it with the combats. And so when I told them later, I was like, this is why I did this and how I laid it out. And they were all like, that was really smart. I'm glad you did that because everybody got a chance to do stuff, but John got to shine in the areas that he wanted to with the combat. And so they were very appreciative of that. And that's how I kind of ran it all in one night. So despite how long this video is, I know I'm talking kind of fast and I kind of breeze through it. So what I would suggest is normally I would offer that I would give my notes for how to run it. In this particular case, because I took like 99% of that, 95% of it from Professor Dungeon Master's thing, I don't want to give that to you because that just is not honest. And so, but what I would say is if you want to kind of see how he did it. Now, I lay mine out completely different. You can see my link. His is a Word document and it's all fits on like 2 pages of a Word document. And he doesn't use he uses a little bit of bullet points, but my layout's very different. But get his, still join his Patreon for $2 and you can go in a section and download every PDF that he's ever sent to any of his patrons. And it's worth it. It's worth the $2, right? And so you'll get his notes. But what I can offer is if you would like any of those weird tables that I talked about before. Now, they are on my blog, but some people might want like a format that's easier to reference at the table than a website. If you want, send me an email. I'll put my email in the show notes below, but it's samethdm, and it's a Gmail address. And I will send you a nice formatted table if you want that you can use if that's of something of interest to you. And also let me know, like, is something like that something that you would be interested in if I did start a Patreon? Would that be something that would be enough of you to give to you for your patronage? I'm kind of considering doing that. And I would be interested to hear your thoughts if something like that would be, enough of an incentive for you to join the Patreon. So that's going to wrap this particular session up. So again, let me know if you want any of those weird tables, and I can, send those to you. And with that, I want to thank you very much for watching, and let you know that you can please leave comments below and let me know what you thought about the video. As always, please like and subscribe. Please follow me or join me on social media. And if you could buy something from my shop, like a shirt, hoodie, mug, poster, etc., that would help support the channel. And that's going to wrap it up. I already talked about my blog, so I'm just going to say thank you again very much for watching. Stay safe, happy gaming, and I will talk to you next time. And now for the bonus content, this is what I was drinking, what I was listening to when I worked on my notes for this video. So I was drinking some of this. This is High West Double Rye, and I don't think I featured this one before. I should probably make like some kind of spreadsheet to remind myself what I've talked about so I don't accidentally share something I've already shared. But I think I've talked about before, and I'm a big fan of rye whiskey, even more so than bourbon. And I just like the spiciness notes to it. So this is a blend of straight rye whiskeys. And it's from Park City, Utah, and it's kind of a fun story there. So my dad, when I was in junior high, he got transferred. His work transferred us, or him, to Salt Lake City, a suburb of Salt Lake City. And so I was a soccer player at the time. And so every year at the first part of October, they had this weekend. You got a day off. You had a 3-day weekend for deer hunting season being open. I was not a hunter, but I was a soccer player. And they used to have this giant soccer tournament where different teams from all over the state came to Park City for that 3-day weekend. And then what they did was they divided people up onto different teams based on their age. But sorry about that. But you got to play with different people, and then they would make these new teams, and then you would play in this 3-day tournament. So that's my memory of going to Park City. It's not skiing or anything like that. It's playing soccer up there, which was really fun. So anyway, here's to my friend John and his birthday. I hope he had fun at that session that I ran for him and our friends. So I just drink this neat. Although it makes a great Manhattan as well. So it's a little higher proof, 46%. So 46% APV, so 92 proof, but still, it's pretty smooth. Okay, what I was listening to, the Immortal Otis Redding, classic record. So this was recorded in a few sessions that he did. I think there were 3 sessions total, where he recorded all these songs that were, all of them except one, were new. So the Happy song had been released before, but they recorded all these sessions in spring, summer, and fall. Yeah, I was right. It was 3 sessions in 1967. And then right when the album came out, shortly thereafter, he passed away, unfortunately. So this was actually released. Actually, it was released posthumously. So it was released right after he passed away. If you're not familiar with the story, it was a plane crash. So it was him and a bunch of members of the Barkays band. I know there was only one survivor. But classic songs on here, Hard to Handle. So I think most people should know that song. It's very famous. It's been covered before. And I just forgot the band who covered it. Was it the Black Crowes? Hard to Handle? I think it was. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got, Amen is a classic song. I've got Dreams to Remember. Just there's a bunch. So this is a great soul album. Otis Redding is, one of the classic singers, soul singers. So definitely check this album out, as well as the rest of his catalog. This just happened to be the one that I put on. This is from my Vinyl Me Please club that I belong to. So it's a really nice pressing with a really good liner notes. So that's it. Thank you again for watching. If you could please check out some of these other Daddy Roll to One videos here, I would really appreciate it. And I will talk to you next time. Cheers.